Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. I'm Martin Jones.
And I'm John Paul Nevin. In this show, we talk to world-leading experts about how to unlock the full potential of people who work in high-stress, high-stakes environments.
Today, we're with Luke Sinnot. While serving as a Royal Engineers search advisor in Afghanistan, Luke lost both of his legs in an IED explosion.
The left leg had triggered it, I think. So my left leg had gone quite quickly. The right leg was just shattered.
Luke's story is one of incredible determination and goal setting, which began in the early days of his rehabilitation.
I don't know where it came from, but I started talking about being a pole vaulter when I was in Headley Corps. And I thought, I think I can still do this. Give me some bouncy legs and I'll make this happen.
Luke has since gone on to represent Great Britain in both parasailing and long jump and is currently training to be a commercial pilot.
If you are struggling in life, you feel directionless, you feel rudderless, I would go and find sport first. Because I think it opens up other avenues in your life that you might not have even considered.
Luke, welcome to the podcast. How are you today, bud?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, dodging all the flus and bugs out there. So yeah, as an athlete, that's always a bonus.
Fair on, mate. I can certainly relate to that. So obviously, I've known you for a long time, a very long time. But I suppose it's probably quite useful if you could give some of our listeners an insight into your background, where you've came from, what you're currently doing, and what your sort of hopes and aspirations for the future.
Wow, okay, quick biography then. Born and bred in southern England, went off to university, studied economics, and once I finished that, got a career in the sailing industry, spent a couple of years bobbing around on boats, and then I joined the army, commissioned into the Royal Engineers, served for several years, and then got the bad news in Afghanistan, late 2010. Lost my legs, double above knee amputee. From there, obviously injured and going through rehabilitation. Got into parasport, so I've been a parasailer and a para long jumper. And more recently, I've been working on a commercial pilot license. And so I'm been flying for about 10 years and I'm taking it to the next step now to see if I can make it a profession before I'm too old.
Like a modern day Douglas Bader. Is that what you're going for?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I mean, he's paved the way already for amputees. I mean, a different time. Don't get me wrong. Planes were very different back then. It's a lot more academic flying now, but the same challenges still exist today. So yeah, he's paved the way, but also it's a lot harder now.
So obviously, look, I suppose it'd be quite interesting for our listeners to understand what was your specific role in the engineers. What was it you were doing, and what was it the quite unique tasking which you had to fulfil during Operation Herrick?
Yeah, I mean, Royal Engineers are a weird hat. As you know, JP, you were one yourself. We're like the contractor. You know, I've got something I need doing. Who does that? I don't know. Royal Engineers, we'll get them to do it. And so your career kind of went that way. You'd bob around different capabilities. Sometimes in the same unit, you'd do like several different jobs in one unit. You had to be a construction guy. Sometimes we were doing armoured stuff. Sometimes we were doing light roll. Sometimes we were doing counter IED stuff. Now we do the nuclear capability, CBRN. We've got about 20 different hats we put on. It's a long training course for all the soldiers. We go through long courses for our capabilities that we need to learn. And after, I think it's an 8-month course for officer training, I commissioned into 2 Engineer Regiment. Predominantly, I went in there to do armoured engineering and drive around in tanks. But quite quickly, that role became quite diverse. I ended up patrolling jungles for a while, doing construction tours, did a couple of Battises. I was doing light roll support as well. And that pretty much was how that career was going until I went into counter ID. And that was probably the more stable part of my career where I actually knew what I was going to be doing. And we were just focused solely on counter ID, working to train the guys up, get ready to dispose of IEDs and find them and move on. I posted into 2-3 Engineer Regiment with the airborne guys, but then we got re-rolled and found out we were all doing counter ID. And that's when I moved on to Herrick for the counter ID role.
Can you tell us about that role in counter ID? What were the demands? What were the challenges, the opportunities? What was the role?
If you look at a counter ID squadron, effectively you're either in UK ops, where your job would be to secure VIP locations, or work with the special forces on helping them to move into locations with a high risk of bomb threats. So you would do various roles in the UK around that. On operations, you have a 7-man team. Your job will be to go out and search routes or buildings or whatever it may be, working with a high threat operator whose job would be to dispose of the devices once you found them. And so we split into two distinct parts in a counter ID task force. You've got the guys that find the bombs, and then you've got the guys that dispose of them. And they're separate platoons with multiple teams that are able to be tasked. It was the biggest threat we were facing out in Afghanistan. So our company strength grew and grew and grew. And by the time I was in the role, we had about 17 teams we were deploying. A standard squadron of counter ID, we'd only have about 8 teams. So you can see that they'd thrown a lot of manpower and the effort to try and get on top of the problem, really, out in Afghanistan, because it was just getting away from us at times.
I'm going to make an assumption here, having never done this job, but I can imagine it was a pretty scary thing to do, knowing that that's a major threat and you're the person who's been pushed out to go and find them. I mean, was it an anxious time? And like, how do you deal with those sorts of demands of actually putting yourself in harm's way like that?
Yeah, it's a strange one, really. I mean, effectively, you're playing hide and seek with the terrorist group, and you're trying to use the best technology you've got available to find the best techniques he's using to try and fool you. We were behind on the tech race, I think. They were outsmarting us. We just didn't have the technology to deal with what they were doing, and they were basically just getting simple. The more simple the technology, the harder it was for us to find. So yeah, it was daunting. The thought of being blown up. Nobody liked that thought. But it was also incredibly dull, because you could spend 8-9 hours walking down a road looking for something that's not there. And it's hard to keep people sharp for 9 hours straight. And that was one of the biggest threats we had, was guys just switching off for a bit, including ourselves as well as the commanders. So yeah, it was certainly one of the big issues we had. Was we knew that the people that preceded us, they were getting high casualty rates. When I went through Herrick, the previous Herrick tour, they were getting injuries and KIAs around 1 in 5, 1 in 6 in the task force, which is bloody high. And that was hanging over you. That was like a dark cloud that hung over you, and everyone was aware of that.
Mm.
So, Luke, probably useful, for the listeners, can you give them a sort of a brief description as to a typical job tasking? How quickly that tasking would come in, the loads which you were typically having to carry, obviously the equipment, scales, but then what was happening on the ground?
In Afghanistan, we had 2 taskings we could get. It would easily be what we call a 10-liner, where someone had found a device or suspected device. So that would normally be led by the high threat operator, the bomb disposal guy. That would be his lead on the tasking. And we'd normally go out, get the device, and get out of there, collecting all the evidence and data we could. The other type of taskings we got would be deliberate operations, and that would be someone saying, we want to get down this road to that camp over there. We've had multiple casualties down there. We need you to plan an operation to get us there. So the Royal Engineers Search Advisor would lead on that, which was my role. And you plan an op over however many days it's going to take with all the assets you required. And you go out, and if you found a device, you'd phone in a 10-liner, get rid of it, and move on, get to the next one. So those were the 2 types of taskings we did in Afghanistan. It was high in demand. Most units wanted us for something, so you were often having to go for the critical stuff. Kit-wise, wow, we were a lot of kit. If we were going through compound areas as well, because if we had to isolate an area for wires, any kind of initiation, we'd have to isolate the areas before we searched through them. So if that meant climbing over people's houses and stuff, we'd be carrying ladders, as well as all our own weapon systems, our survival stuff. You're going to have to carry all your sleeping stuff, all your food, all your water, ammunition. We'd be carrying all our electronic countermeasures, which most units didn't have because it was highly secretive stuff and only we operated with it. And that was the heaviest bit of kit you'd carry. And it had fans on it. You could hear the fan cooling systems going. You had multiple batteries you had to carry for it. So that would be all in like 30, 40 kilograms on your back before you even put your own stuff on. And you're carrying ladders, potentially, like all your search equipment. So yeah, we would be looking at easily your own body weight on your back when you're deploying onto the ground live role. So quite often, more often than not, you'd be trying to get vehicles to support you, because if you didn't, like asking your guys to go 8 hours with 80 kilos on their back, unrealistic in those conditions. So yeah, as a commander, again, just all the stuff you're thinking about was like, right, well, how do we get our kit? How do we get our guys as clean fatigued as possible so they can get out there and do their job safely? I don't want to be dragging around 6 giant kit bags behind them. So we always had to find ways to do it. So yeah, exhausting work. We weren't tabbing anywhere. We weren't moving fast. But the guys had long distances to move at a steady pace.
So, look, you sort of alluded to it there. You were in a command appointment for a RESA team. What was the quite unique burdens of command for your role? Because obviously the threats which you were exposed to were arguably greater than a typical line infantry unit because of the role you had to fulfil. And that must have placed additional challenges upon you. So what were they?
Health and safety, dare you say it? You're always thinking about that. You want guys' survivability. If they do get the bad news and they get blown up, you want to make sure they've got the right PPE on to survive. I mean, for my example, ice specs were a big one. Guys hated wearing them because they'd steam up. But I was always insistent, you've got to wear them. We're trying to find ways to encourage them to wear them. And when I got blown up, all that was left was the outline of my plastic specs. The shattered glass had done its job and saved my eyes. And I think it's a pretty hard way to teach the guys you've got to wear their safety equipment. But I think after that, they all wore their safety specs after seeing what happened to me. So, there's all those standard arguments that every workplace has about wearing your safety equipment, doing things properly. I suppose the aspect of always making sure guys were interlocking with their covers of arcs when they're searching the ground. You've got to make sure you're not leaving any bit of ground uncovered. And between you and your team commander, you'd often be watching that. You want guys always on the ball, you don't want them drifting off. It's a dull job, like I said, but it was vital that they were switched on the whole time. So there was a lot around that as a commander. As a commander, you're thinking about the bigger picture all the time. It's not just your little piece of the puzzle where you're searching down a route. You've got to be thinking about where your protection is, because we got our heads down, we're trying to look at the ground. If we're looking at the ground, we can't see the threats coming in from the side. And more often than not, when you were doing a high-risk search, you were pushing into enemy territory and you were right at the front of the wedge that was coming through. So more often than not, you were the ones in the firing line. There was never going to be anyone in front of you. But if you didn't have the protection to your side, you were at high risk. And we'd often come into contact doing that role just because of the fact the enemy knew who we were, knew what we were doing about removing their high assets. They wanted those devices in the ground. They didn't like the fact we were turning up, and they had bounties on a lot of our heads. Getting one of the search guys, the fighters would get extra pay for it. So we were on their list, just like the SF guys, stuff like that. We were a pest to them. It's quite a big footprint when we turn up. So we know they're waiting for us every time we come in, and every op we did, we knew operational security wasn't brilliant, particularly when you're doing like Afghan-led ones. So often you turn up and realise, they knew we were coming. They'd done stuff to make it harder for us. So it was all this stuff played in your head as a commander.
Luke, can we just loop back a second to this idea of the job's quite dull? That there's these long periods of maybe boredom. There's a few people I've talked to in similar high-stress jobs, and the capacity for boredom actually seems to be really important because, even the more dynamic, kinetic jobs, there is long periods of just sitting and staring at the same thing over and over again, or just doing the same thing over and over again. So the capacity to be bored but stay focused is something that's really, really important. And it sounds like that was something important for you in your role. So how do you do it? What did you used to do, or how did you encourage your people to maintain that focus when they might be doing the same thing for hours and finding nothing?
I mean, the soldiers particularly are expert at that, the monotony of the job and making it interesting. I mean, the banter was big, lots of abuse flying around, which always helped. Yeah, it's standard, yeah. There'd be a lot of, not chatting all the time, and they were focused on the job. I wanted them focused on the job. So if I thought the chat was starting to get in the way of what the safety and what they were doing, I'd stamp it out. But you'd often want to encourage that as well. The guys always carried markers. So I'd be like, right, stop there, mark it, take a moment. Unless we were under massive time pressure, I was a big fan of just stop, clear your head, get back in there. I'm fully aware of the fact that average person can't hyper-focus like that for too long. I thought if I was starting to go a little bit like, whoa, I've been drifting a bit there. I know they're probably in the same boat. I mean, I don't know what the levels of ADHD are like in soldiers, but I suspect quite a few of them probably do. So trying to get someone, with that difficulty focusing, getting them to focus like that, or hyper-focus on the ground. I mean, we'd spot devices not just by detectors, but ground sight was a big one. And you'd have some guys that were just Jedi at it. They could see a device 30, 40 meters away. They just see something in the ground that made them think something's there. But, they still got to focus on getting to that 30, 40 meters because they would do stuff to make you think a device was there. There was no tactic they didn't try. So you had to take every step and expect every bit of ground, every spot of ground on a route now, because we had to say with confidence, 100% confidence, that route is safe for you to walk down now. Last thing you wanted to do was have a Johnny English moment and go, this is the safest place in the world, and then an explosion go off behind your head. So, there was a high pressure on you to make sure it was all done properly, as well as, your guys staying safe and doing that. Keeping it interesting was always challenging, to say the least. I preferred the 10-liners because it was in, punchy, fast, get it done. Normally we'd helicopter in as well because it could be anywhere in our area of responsibility. Helicopter in, drop the guys in, get the job done, heli back out again. Those ops are brilliant and guys were on it all the time. Those long route clearances we used to have to do. I'd even put in like 20-minute break where the guys could sit down, they get cards out. You know, they'd be playing cards, there'd be a gun battle going on above their head and they'd just be sat there playing cards, just de-stressing. And I think that's the key. I don't have any wonder tips to how to get through that sort of stuff. I think you've got to go by your weakest man. If you saw someone was flaking, everyone had to go at their pace.
So, look, can you take us through the incident where you got hit? What happened? What was the build up to it? And then obviously what happened consequently when you were casevaced back to the UK?
So the day I was injured, it was an unusual op actually. And I suppose my spidey senses should have gone at that one, really. But we were in Rehab, which is at the northern edge of our responsibility at the time. We'd just given Sangin to the Americans at the beginning of the tour. So we'd been into Sangin a couple of times to help them out with a few IED issues. But we were in Rehab, which was like the next village along from Sangin. And at the time, I remember that the Americans were just kicking the hell out of Sangin. I mean, there was non-stop flight missions coming in, all kinds of ordnance being dropped. I mean, it's only a small area, Sangin, so I couldn't believe the amount of ordnance they were dropping. And I just remember just seeing the gunships constantly circling. So where we were felt relatively peaceful. The Irish Guards were the unit in charge of the Rahim base at the time. They had big issues with IEDs right outside the patrol base. I think someone had been injured literally stepping out of the gate. So they were pinned by quite a lot of IED action around their location. A local elder's son had been killed by an IED. And so he had volunteered to the base to actually come in and show us where all the IEDs were, the ones that he knew about anyway, and start getting them cleared. So he was working with us to help us clear up the area. So it was a strange one because it wasn't actually a deliberate op. We weren't going in and route clearing. We were working on the basis that they would call us in for 10-liners. Every time this old guy pointed out an IED, we'd do a 10-liner, get rid of it. So day one, we were clearing just outside the camp, actually, I remember, on this sort of flat plain. They were sat on top of this hill with a path going off down to the side. And we were clearing the area around the camp. And we pulled like 5 or 6 devices out right from underneath the camp hanging, which made me thought, how have they got them this close? Literally, they're sticking them right under the nose of the guard. And I think they were just using, whenever there was a sandstorm, they were coming in under the sandstorm to stick these devices. I mean, in random places, you could see they'd done it in blind in the dark, effectively. So I remember we pulled out loads first day and then dressed back into the camp, getting ready to start moving down into the village itself. I remember it was a Saturday morning, and I remember listening to the ICOM chatter. You could hear them talking and getting ready because they'd seen the infantry guys push out first to do their sort of side protection for us. So we were operating on this top of this hill, so you're really exposed. I remember just sort of looking at the ground thinking, I'm not happy with this. There's nowhere else to go, and there's not a lot of cover. So they've gone out, first 10-liners gone out, and we've moved out, searched our way down to the top of the path. And I remember identifying a sort of a crater in the ground, probably where a previous IED had gone off. And I got the guys to clear this crater area, bit of low ground. And I said, right, you guys get in there, and then we'll deal with the first device. So the high threat operator and myself moved down. The loads of us walking up and down this path at this point. And it was I remember it's a very, very narrow path. 2 of you would have struggled to pass each other on this pathway. So we're having a look at the first device, and he's gone, right, I'm happy with this. I just need my number 2 and some ECM. So I went up back up the hill, went to my guys. I said, right, I need this, need you, number 2. He wants you down there now. He's going to deal with the device. So I said, right, you guys stay down. I'll take the equipment at number 2 and we'll move back down to the heart threat operator. And as I'm moving down, I've got the ECM that he wants on my back. And I think that was what made the difference, if I'm honest. So I've walked down this path that everyone walked down. I think that extra weight on my back, I just probably hit the sweet spot on that pressure plate. Massive explosion. Very cleverly, they placed it just as the slope started to go down. So obviously, as you're going down, you're putting more force down. So they probably put it there specifically to catch someone who's just stepping down on the hill. It was a big device. Given how small the path was, they put quite a big device there. I guess I'd say it was 5, maybe 7 kilogram. I'm guessing homemade explosive, dust and dirt raining down. And I remember thinking, bloody hell, I think that's me. I'm pinned at this point because of that ECM. It's pinned me back down onto the ground. So I can't move. And I remember I was laying on the ground thinking, bloody hell, it's bright, because obviously I'd lost my sunglasses. And I remember looking up and seeing the Sanger out the corner of my eye and the shocked face on the guy in the Sanger, who's obviously looking over. And I remember thinking, you bastard, why did you not spot them put this device is literally under your nose? How did you not spot this? But anyway, that aside, you're laying there. I remember the number 2 who was on my back. He was on me straight away, started getting tourniquets on me. I'm trying to talk and advise guys, be careful, another device, there might be another device around here, search around me, and everyone's just on top of me. I think that had gone out the window. The left leg had triggered it, I think. So my left leg had gone quite quickly. The right leg was just shattered. And I couldn't see any of this because I was pinned by the ECM. My left arm is very mangled. The left hand had separated at the wrist joint and it was sort of hanging round to the side and had taken all the tissue off the inside of my left arm. So for all intents and purposes, they tourniqueted me pretty much by the armpit and they thought, yeah, he's lost the arm as well. Getting blown up doesn't hurt. I'll be honest, it tickled. That's probably the best way to describe it. It felt like someone gave me a bloody good uppercut. Don't get me wrong. I remember laying on the floor and seeing little Tweety birds spinning around my head. But the tourniquets going on, that's when reality came back. I was like, Jesus, this is painful. I could see me blacking out. I could feel myself going. And, I probably wished I'd blacked out because, I didn't really want to live through that experience. They got me on a stretcher and I was quite fortunate. The Medivac helicopter wasn't busy, so it was straight out to us. And they had me on the back of it within 20 minutes, which is probably one of the reasons they were able to save my left arm. And I just remember the guys were rigging me onto a stretcher. And I remember that was the most painful part. I was almost like, leave me here, lads. It's not worth it. This is too painful. I mean, so moving me around is worse than putting the tourniquets on. Just leave me here. And they got me on the stretcher. They run me up this, landed on the top of the hill where we'd cleared a load of devices the day before, thankfully. Otherwise, that could have been really awful if the Medivac would have landed on some IEDs that had been left. So that was fortuitous, I suppose. And I remember just seeing the whirling rear rotor of the Chinook as we've gone on and the heat coming off the exhaust at the back. Being a, quite pasty guy in Afghanistan, I'd already quite a bit sunburned. Added to that, you got wounds all over your face, you're all opened up. I remember the heat of that exhaust and all the dust and dirt going in my eyes. So just getting crap in my eyes. And I just remember getting a lot of pats. You're all right, boss. You'll be all right. You'll survive. We'll see you soon. We'll see you soon. I remember reaching out a hand to sort of grab one of their hands as I've gone into the back of the Chinook. Unbeknownst to me as well, I did accidentally grope one of the nurses, thinking I was grabbing one of the guy's hands. You're just completely out of it by that point. And then I blacked out. And 2 weeks, I was in an induced coma, so I had no idea what was going on. But as far as I'm aware, it's 24 hours in Bastion, surgical team just saving life, trying to save my arm. And then they got me back to Birmingham, where I came around 2 weeks later.
So obviously, Luke, I think our paths first crossed at DMRC Headley Court would have been 2010 or 2011. By that point, they'd patched you up. So to give our listeners a sort of an understanding, complex trauma where Luke would have came in as a patient. At any one time, there were 70 to 80 patients in the facility, all of whom had just sustained life-changing injuries. But it created quite a unique dynamic. So look, from your perspective, how did you find that environment and obviously what was done over those years?
I remember being dropped off there straight from Birmingham Hospital, and they drop you off in the middle of the night. And as far as you can see, it's like a very fancy, stately home that you're going to. And then they drop you off outside this absolute dump. They are wrapped in there. I mean, I knew that from hospital. We had so many guys being injured. So I knew we were getting our asses handed to us a bit. And so the rooms are designed for one person. There's 4 of you in there. You got your little corner. Everyone's got wheelchairs everywhere, legs everywhere. So it's just chaos, like trying to negotiate your way into this room. I remember there's one sink in the room. We're all taking our turns to brush our teeth and trying our hardest to shave because they were obsessed with us being shaved. I had cuts all over my face and I having to shave around all these bits on my face. But you try and toe the line. I was in an electric chair, I remember, when I first arrived, just because my left arm was so bad. I'd just go in circles if they put me in a manual chair. So I had an electric chair to begin with. I remember that the journey there was loads of ups and downs. I don't know if they intentionally did that, but you'd all be like, we're all moving in a line really quickly, and then you'd hit an upslope, and then there'd just be chaos. Well, it was always the slowest guy was at the front, and it held everyone up, and then you're trying to go slowly up a ramp, and people are like going off the sides. And I remember the chaos of getting there, and you finally get to the main gymnasium where you register. And it was amazing. There were guys at different levels of recovery. So there were guys like you recently bashed up. They're in their wheelchairs and looking pretty broken and emancipated, the weight you've lost from all the work your body's doing to recover, you don't look good. And then you got the guys at the far end of the scale who are walking around on legs, pretty much ready to leave. They're pissing around, messing about because, they can. The confidence is back, the mojo is back. And that's all going on in front of you in the room. And you're thinking, right, I know where this is going. Up to this point, all I was thinking about was my next meal, my next step in hospital. Just sitting up in bed was an achievement. Just getting out of your bed into a chair was another. That was me done for the week. I've achieved that. Being able to transfer onto the toilet yourself, that was the next big step. Not having to poo in bed. I remember when they'd have to bring you your bedpan, you'd be like, oh God, I hate doing this laying down. It's horrible. So to be able to sit in the toilet for the first time, amazing feeling. And then suddenly you're in this environment where you're like, this is the big leagues now. This is where it really happens. So yeah, I think you went from really down, you come out of hospital, you've lost that safety blanket of the hospital, and then suddenly you're on your own and it's all back on you again. And you're a bit down about that, but when you see where you could be going, you're ready for it.
It sounds like you had a pretty rough time and then you met JP and it got even worse.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about, like, what did JP do? What was it like having people like JP around, and what did they actually do?
JP, yeah. Wow. I mean, lucky or unlucky, I got JP as my ERA. To tell you the truth, I'd always had a good relationship with all the PTIs. Because I was always quite fit. But meeting JP, it was good. I mean, I felt quite fortunate because there were quite a few non-military PTIs there. And I think I was happier getting a military PTI. They just understood you better, knew how to motivate you better as well. And were motivated themselves a bit better, I think, because they're posted in. They got 2 years. A lot of them have been working a long time to get to this point. I think it's fair to say it's the cream of the crop.
JP would say that, I'm sure.
Yeah, no. I think for those of us military staff at Headley Court, several of us came off the back of an Afghan tour and got posted straight to Headley Court. And that was a bit of an eye-opener. It became personal. You couldn't be objective because you'd almost seen people at point of injury. You've seen them get Kazivat through Bastion, and then you come back 3 months later and you're working in the rehab, and you then have those connections. And if you've got that as a driver, as a member of staff, then it's mirrored, obviously, because no one really cares how much you know until you know how much you care. And everyone in that environment did. Don't get me wrong, but I think if you'd had that operational experience, we were certainly motivated and then some.
Luke, can we talk about resilience? It's something we've talked about a few times in a few different episodes. This ability to deal with difficulty, deal with stress, bounce back, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I'm going to say you're a resilient person. You certainly sound like it. Like, how did you become resilient? What was resilience in practice for you through this process?
I think you realise how resilient you are until the chips are down. I suppose when you look back, you can look back at small moments where it was tough going and you made it through. Like military training is tough. Whatever level you're at, everyone's got their own personal demon. And I think if they can see you're a bit fitter, they'll push you a bit harder. They see you're mentally a bit better, they'll throw more tasks at you, try and test you and break you. And so I think you're a pretty resilient person to join the military, I think. You've got to have your eyes open when you're walking in there. But they certainly bring that out in the military training and the way that we train in the UK particularly. It's always wet, it's always cold. So physically it is challenging as well. And so you pick up a lot of resilience just from the UK training. But until the chips are down, I don't think you realise what kind of person you are resilience-wise. And some guys did thrive after being injured and they were resilient and they just got on with it. And other guys, it did break them and they didn't really recover from it. They might be at some level of recovery now, but I think it was a lot slower because they just didn't bounce back as well. So I think for me, I was just determined not to let the enemy win. I think that was a bit for me. I mean, I'm sure the guy who planted that device is long gone, probably met his maker not long after I got the bad news. But you think, I've survived the injury. The last thing I want to do is let it ruin the rest of my life. And I think you do use that as a driving force. Don't get me wrong, like those first few weeks when I was awake, I remember staring at that clock thinking, this can't be right. This didn't happen. You're thinking, how do I reverse this? How do I invent a time machine and go back and change this? But you think, I've just got to embrace this and try and make the most of it. I had mates that had been injured that came in to talk to me, were on their legs, and saying, don't worry, this is what's coming up for you. Gave you goals to aim for. And I think that helps with your resilience. You've got to have a way forward. There's no point like not knowing where you're going because you're lost. And their resilience disappears quite quickly. The resilience comes from having a goal and a target. I don't know where it came from, but I started talking about being a pole vaulter when I was in Headley Court. This is showing my age now, but when I first got injured, they gave you an iPad, and they'd just been invented. It was a new thing. Here's an iPad. You've got access to the internet. Do what you want. We'll close the curtains. Good luck to you. And I know some of the guys used it for that. But I started Googling pole vaulting. I'd always wanted to try pole vaulting. And it was almost like the extreme end of what you can physically do as a person. And I thought, I think I can still do this. Give me some bouncy legs and I'll make this happen. So there's things like that, just setting really high goals that gave me the determination and the resilience. I always had my picture on the big goal, which was let's make the most of your life. Whatever path you've chosen, you're going to give it 100%. And the only way you get there is get through this rehabilitation to begin with.
And how is your pole vaulting?
I did do it, yeah. I had to learn how to walk first, and then eventually they let me learn how to run. And I was one of the ones that was chomping at the bit to get on the running blades. I think as far as prosthetic work goes, running is like the hardest thing you'll do and the highest level of what you do as an amputee. And I took to the running quite quickly, and I found a lady willing to teach me pole vaulting. But she started me off in a long jump pit, and you sort of pole over it and land at the back end of the long jump pit. And we were doing that, and I thought, hang on a minute, why don't I try long jumping? So I did pole vault. I didn't manage to get up and over a bar. Never got that far, but never say never. There's always time.
Look, I'm just going to step back one. In regards to rehab, how important do you feel that humour, a positive growth mindset, how important were those ideas to your rehab? And then building on from that, how important was sport and battle back? And I'll let you explain what battle back was as part of that.
I mean, yeah, the humour is, I think that's the key to why we're so successful at overcoming these things in the military. I think being British forces always outnumbered and always in a situation with not quite the right equipment, but we make it work. So the black humour often helps with the overcoming of these things. So at Headley Court, yeah, it was dark humour. I mean, I remember the original sea legs had a little fob, which is Bluetooth.
I forgot about that. Totally forgot about that.
Yeah, you just need a little pin in the back and you can reset the Bluetooth and pick up other legs. So guys would be sat there in the morning at registration trying to connect to someone else's leg. And there were two functions on the fob. It was free swinging knee, so basically turn the knee off. And the other function was a fixed knee, I think, so you could fix it straight, so you could stand straight. So we'd all be sat there at registration if we had legs, and you'd be trying to get your Bluetooth to connect to someone else's leg. And the moment you see their leg flashing when you got them, and you'd switch their leg off so they'd fall on the floor. So I just remember that, and everyone would erupt in laughter. We'd be mid-registration and suddenly a guy just hits the deck because one of his legs has been switched off. Completely unbeknown to him. But it got to the point where they had to take all the fobs off us.
So they had all the fobs got put in that secure locker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Oh.
Which was annoying if you were looking to get payback with someone. And the thing was, it would get worse because you'd be looking to get payback, but the Bluetooth might not pick up the guy you want. But you've got someone, so you'd be like, sod it, I'll do him instead. There was one guy, it's always his leg. He must have a very sensitive leg to Bluetooth. He always got pinged. But those are the sort of things that sort of got you through the day. You could see guys who were struggling. The humour would often pull them out of it a bit. Rehab is very dull. There's not a lot of fun moments. It's hard work. It's repetitive. It's monotonous. You do your best to make it interesting, but you're in a sterile environment, and you've got to be, because you've got guys missing limbs, all busted up, and so initially you've got to be careful with them. Don't get me wrong, it got to a point where we were doing like stubby tugs of war and stuff like that.
Stubby boxing,
yeah.
That went down well.
Yeah, that didn't last long. But we're doing all kinds of things, to make it less monotonous. But I think sport is such an awesome rehabilitation tool. Battle Back was about taking guys out into various different sports, adaptive sports as well, or non-adaptive if you wanted to give it a try unadapted. And you get out there and they take you away for anything from a day up to a couple of weeks, and you would be immersed into this sport. You would be trying to work out how to work your way around things. If you were triple amputee, life was a lot tougher for them, and they'd be trying to work out how to fire a weapon with one hand if they were doing shooting, or archery, how you're going to do it. So there's some amazing things they did, and Battle Back, I think, was massive force multiplier in people's rehabilitation. I mean, I personally, I went into parasailing quite early on, and that was a massive driving force for me because I wanted to get in the boat, I wanted to sail, but getting the boat ready for the water took a lot of work, and you couldn't do it from your wheelchair. Just wasn't possible. So I had to be on my legs to get a lot of stuff done that I needed to do in the boat. And so more often than not, I'd be walking around on legs I haven't had long, on wobbly pontoons, carrying kit down to the boat, really testing myself. I fell in the water a few times, don't get me wrong. I wasn't that great with my legs, but it meant I was in an environment where I had to do what I needed to do in Headley Court to get the ticks in the box, to get the legs I needed, working really hard with the prosthetist to make sure the legs were right for me so I could get out there and do what I needed to do in the sailing world. Sport was the number one reason I was moving as fast as I was in my rehabilitation. It's got to a point where I was planning my follow-up surgery around sailing competitions. So I was negotiating with my surgeon. He'd be like, right, you've got to come in and have that work done on your right leg, Luke. And I'd be like, yeah, okay, well, I've got competition here and here. So if you can squeeze me in this 3 weeks here, and if you're happy, I'll only have 5 weeks recovery. And they'd be like, oh my God, panicking. But I think the surgeons deep down were like, actually, this is working. We're seeing this guy, snapshots of him, and all we can see is a steady improvement. So they work around your schedule almost when they could see that this was having such a massive effect on your rehabilitation. There's the amount of guys that had surgical work done and it wouldn't work because they just weren't fit and healthy and pushing it. You know, they were plodding along and just, the surgeon would be like, you've got to come in for surgery. You'd be like, yeah, whenever you want, my diary's wide open. And I think those made the worst patients, to be honest. I think the better patients were the ones that push you for recovery.
So, look, as part of that, I always remember the time when we got you out in Operation Surf.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty unique event because obviously we combined not only the physiological but the psychological, and also there's a degree of spirituality in that activity. So can you explain to what was Op Surf and maybe the incident where you decided to try out a career as a boy?
Yeah, not one to do one by heart. I mean, Op Surf was brilliant. I know this was your baby, JP, when you set it up years ago with some good connections with the American surf community. The big selling point, I think, was the healing power of the water. And I get that. Being a sailor, I was like, yeah, I get that. Being on the sea, being on the water, in it or on top of it, there's something quite powerful about that. So Op Surf was, it was amazing, really, to fly out to California. And there you are with all these top US surfers. And there they are giving their time up to put a load of broken soldiers on surfboards and see if they can get surfing. And I remember day one, I wanted to do something that no one else had tried. I wanted to try it on my stubbies, on my little stubby feet. And they pair you up with this surfing expert. And I remember I had a guy who did all the big wave surfing. Really interesting guy. He's like, so you want to try standing up surfing? I was like, yeah. We just practiced a few with me staying flat on the board. And then we thought, let's go for it. And I popped up and obviously had no stability whatsoever. And I've gone straight in the water. But because of the foam in my legs, I just ended upside down, stuck. So effectively I was drowning in front of everyone upside down.
Mate, I remember watching it for the beach and everyone's like, why is there a boy so close to the water? I don't think it's a boy, it's moving, just in these two wee stubby legs in the water.
Yeah. Felt like an Eskimo roll in a canoe, but I was stuck. Luckily, he paddled over and pulled me up the right way. But it was an amazing week. I mean, surfing is such an amazing tool. The way it was used like that for rehabilitation, I know it's turned quite a few lives around.
Luke, you were about to tell us about your long jumping earlier. Can we pivot back to your long jump stories? Tell us about your career thus far in the long jump.
Yeah, so I was sailing for Great Britain from 2011. So I hadn't long been in Headley Court before I was off to British sailing. And I think they thought, oh, well, this is lucky. We got an ex-pro sailor who's lost his legs, and we got Paralympics coming up, and they were out searching for athletes. And so I was like their easy win for them. I had an amazing time. I was sailing with two great guys. We'd all gone through Headley Court together. But I just remember just being frustrated a lot of the time because you're sailing a boat and you're not you anymore. So I pulled out in 2014 and I decided to make the change over to athletics. I'd done my research and found out that there is an event for long jumping with my category of disability. The landing was the biggest issue. You've got to get those blades out of the way when you land because they are bouncy. So if you land blade first, it's going to bounce you back out of the pit. And I remember getting that wrong a couple of times where I jumped, landed in the pit and bounced back at the board, landed back on the wrong way, feeling like I'd just been punched as well because of the impact of it. I had to learn how to land on my bottom and take the impact of that. I mean, it was massive impact on my body. And given that what I'd been through, the injuries and stuff. I hadn't been putting my body through what it had been through when I was in the army. So I think I'd softened up quite a lot since my army days. And so it took quite a while to build the ruggedness to take the impact of it all. I roped JP in because he was helping me out with the sailing, with my strength and conditioning. So I roped him into the athletic stuff. I said, I'm thinking about being a long jumper. I think you laughed for a while.
Yeah, I thought you were taking the mic.
So, yeah, I think 2015 was my first real venture into it. And then I got selected for the British team in 2017. So that was my first international call-up. It's a tough comp. I'm not going to lie. I sort of went in going, 4.5 meters, you're doing all right. 4.5 meters is quite a big jump for a lot of disabilities. In my event, we're jumping 7+. Some guys are tickling 8 meters. These are guys with no legs. And when I say no leg, I don't mean like the scratch below knee. I mean, there's nothing below the knee. So it's all bionic and it's all prosthetic. The 10 years I've been in, I've seen a lot of different blades come and go. And so I think technology has definitely helped with some of the performances. But you can't take away from the fact it's technically very difficult running down a runway at those speeds to hit a tiny little board on a giant carbon spring. And then to have the strength and the capability to take you up in the air and fly it out as far as you can without hurting yourself as well. Because obviously, those blades could quite easily go from being your best friend to your worst enemy. It's been a hell of a learning curve. But I'd say, again, sport has opened up so many different things. It has many uses, but for rehabilitation, there's nothing like it.
That's great. Luke, I really appreciate your time. What we like to do is offer you the opportunity to give us the final words. It can be something you want to reinforce, something you want to introduce, maybe a lesson learned that you could share with people. So over to you, Luke. How do you want to wrap this episode up?
Well, I'm training to be a commercial pilot now, and I would say that has only come about because of the motivation and the fitness and the mental strength that I needed in sport. And so I think if you are struggling in life, you feel directionless, you feel rudderless, I will go and find sport first. Because I think you will find it opens up other avenues in your life that you might not have even considered. And I know for a fact that as an amputee, flying an aeroplane, what I'm doing is quite groundbreaking. It's not been done in a long time. Technology is coming on nicely and it is helping, but you can't take away from the fact that it's physically and mentally quite draining to do it as an amputee. And the only reason I've got that ability is because of sport and the confidence as well to go for it. So get out there and do it. And I think it's vitally important that people aren't worried about failure. You don't have to go out there and win all the medals. You're winning just by being there and doing it. So yeah, that would be my final thought.
Look, by the beard of Zeus, mate, that's impressive. That was good.
And Luke, if people want to follow your journey, is there a way of people seeing what you're up to and getting in touch?
Well, yeah, I'm on social media. I'm not very good with it, but yes, I am on social media.
We'll put those in the show notes so people can look. Luke, that was awesome. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. You too.
Cheers, bud.
No worries.
That's it for this week's episode of the Optimizing Human Performance podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and if you found this valuable, take a moment to rate and review the podcast. If you know someone who'd benefit from today's conversation, then please share this with them. We're always keen to hear your thoughts. If you have feedback, guest suggestions, or topics that you'd love us to cover, then email us at info@ophp.co.uk or connect with us on LinkedIn. Until next time, keep striving, keep improving, and keep optimizing your performance.